The story of Bookham's growth as a village is the story of births and deaths, of people joining the village and people leaving. Back at the beginning of the 19th century, Bookham was a small village of around 700 people. It grew steadily during the 19th century until, after the First World War, there were around 1,900 people living in Bookham. The 1920s and 1930s saw the first big influx. By 1931, there were over 3,500 people living here. After the war, by 1951, that had grown to 4,500. Then came the fastest growth in the village's history. In the 50s and 60s, many new people came to live in the village. By 1971, the post-war population had more than doubled to nearly 10,000. There was further growth in the 1990s and slower growth in the early 2000s, bringing Bookham to the place it is today, a community of around 11,400 people. The basic story is of more people joining the village than leaving it. It's no exaggeration to say that people arriving in Bookham have made it what it is today. According to a survey conducted for Bookham Vision, nearly 95% of those who are over 25 were not born here. People tend to come in their 20s, 30s and early 40s and to stay. Almost 1 in 3 is over 60. That compares with 1 in 5 in England as a whole. Now that's not necessarily good or bad, but it does mean we have a large and growing group of older people whose needs should be planned for. That means looking at whether or not they need homes that they can downsize to, whether there's a need for sheltered housing, care homes, and possibly a retirement development. At the other end, people in their 20s and 30s are becoming relatively rare in Bookham. Less than 1 in 6 of us is in their 20s or 30s. That compares with more than 1 in 4 in the country as a whole. If we want Bookham to be a vibrant community with lots of families and children, then we need to be sure that Bookham offers homes that young families can afford to buy and rent. Local people have taken on the task of planning for the future of Bookham. That means planning for the homes that current and future residents will need for the next 20 to 30 years. Now, we don't have a completely free hand here. The Bookham Neighbourhood Development Plan must be consistent with government policy, which means it must contribute to the country's need for more homes. The plan must also be consistent with Mole Valley's plan for the district as a whole, the Mole Valley Core Strategy. The Core Strategy says we need to provide 188 homes a year across the district. Our share of that will be at least 20 to 25 homes a year, and it could be more if the Mole Valley target is revised upwards. 20 to 25 homes a year may seem like quite a lot, but 200 homes were built in Bookham over the last 10 years, and that's 20 a year. We also need to bear in mind that if our plan is not consistent with both government policy and the Mole Valley Core Strategy, it will be rejected. That would mean that the responsibility for planning for Bookham would go back to the local council. One of the big questions is, where will all these extra homes go? Up to now, we have been able to find space within the village for the extra houses that have been needed. But now there is very little space left. All of the land outside the village is Greenbelt. It was designated as Greenbelt more than 50 years ago, and this has meant that development since then has been within the village boundary. The Mole Valley Core Strategy acknowledges that across the district we're running out of space within the built-up areas to build more homes. It therefore concluded that there needed to be a review of the Greenbelt across the district. That process has begun, but the council are not including Bookham in their review. They have delegated the review of the Bookham Greenbelt boundary to the Bookham Vanguard Forum. We might be in two minds about whether that's a good thing, but look at it this way. If we don't conduct the review, Mole Valley will. Another question that people are asking is, can Bookham cope with more people joining the village? What about the traffic? Where will we park? What about getting to see a doctor? Will we be able to get our children into the schools? These are all issues that the infrastructure group is looking at. But there's also an angle that is relevant to housing development. One of the advantages of developing larger sites on the edge of the village is that they are big enough to be able to contribute to some of the facilities that more people will need. This will benefit both the new residents and the existing community. Where there is scope to adjust the Greenbelt boundary, the sites that have been put forward will need to be assessed. They will be looked at from the point of view of road access, sustainability, drainage, proximity to the village, and all sorts of other criteria. That will lead ultimately to decisions about whether or not they should be released for development, whether perhaps they might be safeguarded so that they could be made available at a later stage, or whether they should remain in the Greenbelt for the foreseeable future. That work will be brought together with the output from the infrastructure and business groups to produce a draft neighbourhood development plan. The draft plan will then go out to a 6-week consultation in the village, after which it will be put to Mole Valley for them to check whether it's consistent with the core strategy. If it is, it will then go to an independent examiner. He or she will check it over, and if they clear it, it will be put to a referendum in the village. If a majority of those voting say yes, it will then become part of the basis on which Mole Valley decide planning applications in Bookham. At that stage, the Bookham Neighbourhood Development Plan will begin to have a very real influence on the future of our village.